Today I'm going to show you guys how to do the Emax servo upgrade on the Axial SCX24. I'm going to show you how to install it using the stock servo mount, and I'll also show you using the hot racing upgraded servo mount specifically made for the Emax servos. So you can buy two different versions of this same servo. There's a digital version and there's an analog version. On most of the RC websites where you can buy upgrades for the XCX24, every one that I've seen only offers the analog version, which is going to work just fine. They're both the exact same servo, except one's analog, one is digital, so they'll both fit exactly the same. The only place that I could find that the digital version was available was on the Emax website, so I went ahead and bought mine there, and it actually arrived really fast, faster than anything else I ordered. So if you want the digital version, I would recommend going to the Emax website, just ordering it. The only difference between the digital and analog is the digital is going to have more control and more precision, but there's a trade-off in that it's going to use a little bit more battery, which I'm not too worried about because it's, the battery life on these things is already crazy. It was a trade-off I was willing to make, but either one of them will work just fine. So don't pay attention to this here, whether it's A or D, doesn't matter. This install video will work for both of them. The tools that you'll need for this upgrade are the Allen wrench that came with your truck. It's a 0.05 inch or 1.27 millimeter Allen wrench. You'll need your wheel tool, a small screwdriver for the servo horn. This is the size that I'm using. Some snips to cut the corners of your servo, and optionally a black Sharpie or some black spray paint. So I'm going to start by showing you guys how to install the Emax servo using the stock servo mount. As you can see, it fits just fine. I've already actually installed it because I initially planned on buying two SCX24s, but I haven't bought my second one yet, so I'll just go ahead and use this one, and we'll act like this is the stock servo, and I'll show you how to install it. So if you're interested in only seeing the install with the hot racing mount, I'll make chapters on my video, so you can go ahead and skip to that part now if you're not interested in seeing this. But for now, we're going to go ahead and start with, well, obviously you want to start with taking off the body. I've already done that, and taking off the front two wheels. Once you've done that, we can go ahead and remove these two screws holding in the top of the shocks, and that'll just drop down this axle and make it easier to get in and work on the servo. Alright, so now that we removed now that we've unscrewed the top of the shocks from the body, you see that the axle drops down a little bit more. It makes it easier to work on. So we'll go ahead and unplug your servo. Also, I should mention, obviously, I removed the front bumper. I think that's going to make it a lot easier if you do that. I don't run a front bumper on mine just because it does look better, but it gets in the way when you're trying to climb. It doesn't really matter what order you do all this stuff in. It's just all going to need to come out. Go ahead and unscrew the servo linkage here, and then we can take out the actual servo. Alright, so as you can see, there's my Emax servo. Pretend this is the stock one. So now that we have the old servo out, we can go ahead and take this linkage off of the servo horn, the stock servo horn, because we'll need this linkage. So I'm not going to remove mine because this is the servo that I'm going to reinstall. But if this was your stock servo, you'd go ahead and unscrew this and keep this, and the stock servo horn you can just toss along with your old servo because you won't be needing that. We just removed our stock servo, and all we need to do now is take your Emax servo. So here, I'll get my fresh one here, so you can see what it looks like out of the box. So here's the same servo, brand new, and you can see the modifications that I've done to it. So new one, modified. So you'll want to use your snips and go ahead and cut off the edges here on your servo. And the reason we do that is because when it's installed, if you don't cut off those edges, when the suspension articulates, the edges of the servo can get caught on the frame. So use your snips and go ahead and cut off the corners, and that should fix that issue. The way that we install the servo is the sticker down. So a lot of videos that you'll watch, you'll see people saying that you have to modify the servo mount. They'll say that you need to cut these corners off in order to allow the Emax servo to fit, and that's just not true. As you saw, my Emax servo fit in there without any modifications. So the next step is going to be to install the servo horn on your new servo. And this bag of parts comes with your new servo. There's a couple different options as far as which parts you use to use as your new servo horn. You can either use this one here and trim off the very tip of it, the very last hole, or what I did was you can use this piece here and cut off, you can trim off the 3 sides and use this. So the bag of parts also includes a little screw, a black screw, and this is what you're going to use to attach the servo horn to your Emax servo. Once you've clipped the servo horn down to the size that you want, you can either use your black spray paint or your Sharpie to color it black. What you want to do is once you clip down the servo horn, you want to attach it to your servo and use the black screw to go ahead and screw it down with it facing directly down like this. And then you're going to want to screw the link into the bottom notch on your servo horn. And what I did actually was once I got it screwed in, the screw was actually sticking out quite a bit, and I didn't like the way that looked, and I didn't want it catching on anything, so I went ahead and used the snips to clip the end off. So that's why I don't want to unscrew this, because I don't think it'll go back in, because the tip is kind of effed up a little bit. But it's important that you put the servo horn on while the servo is out of the truck, and you get this servo linkage in while it's out of the truck, because once the servo's in the truck, you're going to have no way of getting a screwdriver back there to install this linkage. So now that you've installed the servo horn and the servo linkage and clipped the corners of your servo, it should look something like this. And from here we can go ahead and actually install it back into the truck. I'm not going to show you every step. You're basically doing everything you did for removing the stock servo, but in reverse. Some key tips are going to be when you install the Emax servo into the stock mount, you're going to want to make sure to push the servo as far back into the mount as possible. The mount wants to push the servo out of the mount because it fits pretty snug. So while you're installing the screws, you'll want to, with one hand, pinch the servo into the mount like this. And with the other hand, you'll use the same screws that we're holding in the stock servo, you're going to use to install the new servo. You'll go ahead and attach the screw to the end of your Allen wrench, and you'll go in, and the key here is to get the screw to just catch. You don't want to tighten it down too much because you don't want to strip out the plastic on the plastic mount. Once you feel it catch and it's holding, then you'll do the same thing on the other side. And from there, you can tighten them down a little bit more just to make sure that they're snug. But you don't want to go too tight because, like I said, it's going to end up stripping out the plastic. So it's secure there. And then you'll just go ahead and secure your linkage. So I'll screw this back into here. And then another tip is after you've screwed everything you need to back in for the servo itself, when you go to screw the shocks back in, you'll notice that your drive shaft probably got disconnected as it was hanging down. You'll want to make sure to reconnect that before you screw your shocks back in. And now that it's connected back, you can bring this back up and screw your shocks back in. And finally, you'll want to reconnect your servo to the ESC, and it's going to go into this first slot marked steering, and the connector is going to go in with the yellow side facing up. After you're done with that, you can reinstall your body, reinstall your tires, and then there's just one more step, centering your servo, but I'll show you that at the end of the video after I show the install with the hot racing mount. So you can go ahead and skip to the end of the video if you want to see that. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how to install the Emax servo using the hot racing mount. To be honest, I would completely avoid buying one of these if you hadn't already, just because you don't need it at all. The only benefit I see to using the hot racing mount is it's going to make installing your servo a little bit easier, and it might add a little bit of weight compared to the stock servo mount just because it's made out of metal. But now that I actually have this thing in hand, I'm not 100% convinced that it's going to weigh more because it's made out of aluminum and it feels pretty light. Now we're going to have to take out this old servo mount. We're going to want to remove this screw here and these screws here, and it should pop right off. Okay, there it is. Yeah, the hot racing mount does feel a little bit heavier, but to be honest, you're not going to notice a difference when you're actually driving the truck. I wouldn't waste money on this servo mount, but I'm going to show you how to install it anyways. So it just slots back in there exactly where the previous mount was. And now you'll just take the two longer screws and thread them back in through the front, and then the shorter one goes back in right there. Okay, so since this is metal on metal, the threads are metal on metal, I'm gonna go ahead and grab some Loctite and dab it right there on that screw just to make sure that it doesn't back out, because I'm feeling like it's going to, because as I'm screwing it in, it's pretty loose. Alright, so I've got the new servo mount installed there, and it's looking pretty good. So now let's go ahead and take our servo, and this should be a pretty easy install compared to using the stock servo mount. Use the screws that came with the stock servo and use those to attach the new one. I'm going to go ahead and put Loctite on these two. When you install the servo, obviously you'll want it installed sticker down with the servo horn facing down. Alright, so not gonna lie, compared to trying to stuff this Emax servo into the stock servo mount, the way that this fits is pretty satisfying. But to be honest, I still don't think it's worth spending the extra money on it. So now we're going to just reinstall the shocks and plug in the servo. So when you plug the servo in, you're going to want to plug it into the first notch here labeled steering with the yellow cords facing up. Also, whenever you go to reconnect your shocks to the body, make sure that the drive shaft is reconnected. All right, so I've got the drive shaft back in. Now I'm just going to go ahead and reinstall my shocks and connect my servo. Also, something else that I almost missed, screwing this link back in. All right, now we can go ahead and reassemble everything. And before we reinstall the body, there's one more step that I have to go over, and that's centering the servo. So out of the box, it's most likely not going to be centered perfectly, but it's an easy fix. All we have to do is go ahead and plug our battery in, turn on our transmitter, and then turn on the truck. The tires aren't probably going to be, they're probably not going to be facing forward when your steering wheel is straight. All we need to do is go to the transmitter, that center knob with the numbers. When you turn this, what that does is adjust the resting point of the servo. So you want to turn that and adjust it until your wheels are straight. Just kind of eyeball it. And then the way to get it perfect is you drive your SCX24 across the floor, and without turning the wheel, you adjust this knob until your car is going 100% straight. So once you've done that, the last step is to adjust this other knob here, which adjusts, I believe it's called the endpoints, this one here. So the higher you go up with it, the farther the servo will extend, and the lower you go, the less range of motion it has. And you want to go as high as you can without having the steering linkages bind or having the servo itself overextend. So the higher you go, obviously the more range of motion you're going to get out of your steering, but you can run into problems with wearing out parts sooner. But as long as nothing's being overextended or your linkages aren't binding or anything like that, then you should be good. So once you've done all of those things, your servo is installed and you can go out and enjoy it. Thanks for watching.